Hey, what's going on, guys? It's your boy, Nerd Mode On, and welcome to episode 9 of Battle Tested, a video series where I take user-submitted loadouts and check and see if they be viable on the battlefield. So for today's episode, we're actually going to be taking a submission from LOLDDGG Lolaz. Now, hopefully I pronounced your name somewhat correct. I'm sure there's a really good story behind your name, but it kind of looks like, from my point of view, you just started mashing some buttons to make a name. But regardless, let's kind of talk a little bit about the loadout request, talk a little bit about the primary weapon, along with everything else that is specified with this particular individual's loadout request. So starting things off on the primary weapon. Today we're going to be using the PDW-R with the iron sights, the tri-beam laser or the laser sight, the suppressor, as well as the Flectran desert camouflage. Our secondary weapon is going to be the M1911 with the grain laser as well as the palm snow camouflage. Gadget 1 and 2 are really not specified, but I decided to go with the RPG as well as the DS3 decoy. Our grenade type is going to be the mini grenades, our knife is going to be the seal knife, and then the field upgrade is not specified, so I decided to opt for the defensive for just a little bit extra protection against bullets. Now, of course, he also left a message for me as well, so of course we're going to be really trying to play on CQB maps, especially when it comes down to Operation Locker and Team Deathmatch as well. He also really wants me to try to destroy some noobs, so I felt like I did pretty good in that aspect when it comes down to the footage you guys are about to watch. So of course he does really enjoy the content and I appreciate that. I always try to upload as much as I can, as well as make the best videos for your guys' viewing expense. Now transferring right along over to the primary weapon, let's talk a little bit about the statistics, considering that this is actually a weapon that I don't have a ton of experience with prior to making this particular video. So of course let's kind of indulge ourselves into what the weapon has to offer in terms of its positive and negative attributes. The PDW-R is a engineer-specific weapon, so of course you have a lot of really compact weapons that would be very good, especially when it came down to having them inside of a tank or any kind of vehicle for transportation methods. However, Battlefield really doesn't facilitate this kind of mentality, considering that when you jump into a vehicle, you just magically become one with the vehicle. So when it really comes down to it, having a weapon that's very compact really doesn't have any benefits when it comes down to jumping in a vehicle. However, if you're going to be deciding to pie around corners and trying to slowly move your way around it, you'll quickly find that your barrel doesn't give away your position as a due result. So of course this is definitely a benefit that a lot of these weapons uphold in comparison to their assault rifle counterparts. Now the PDW-R does have a rounds per minute clocking in at 750 rounds per minute. Unfortunately, 750 rounds per minute in comparison to some of the assault rifles might seem like it's very competitive, but when you look at a lot of the other weapons also in this similar category, it's actually falling behind in comparison to its competitors. So that is definitely a negative attribute when it comes down to facing off with somebody that is also using the engineer category that isn't opting to use a carbine as a due result. Now, kind of taking a look at the velocity of the weapon, it's clocking in at 460 meters per second, which also makes it one of the higher ones in this similar category, so that is definitely a positive attribute that is assigned to this specific weapon. If you were to take a look at a lot of the other weapons in this category, you would notice that they're kind of on the lower spectrum. They sit somewhere between 300 to about 500 meters per second, so of course it's competitive at the same expense, but this is also a positive attribute considering that it is actually on the higher spectrum. Now transferring over to the damage model, the maximum damage that this particular weapon can do is 24 damage, and that starts to drop off at about 8 meters. The minimum damage that this weapon can output is 15.4 damage, and that is achieved at 50 meters. So of course you definitely have a little bit of a cushion when it comes down to the drop-off range, when it comes down to the ultimate damage that this weapon can occupy. Now considering that we're talking about a personal defense weapon and some of the attributes that are assigned to it, one of the benefits that this weapon has over something like an assault rifle is that you can actually shoot it while on the move. Now of course, while you can shoot all weapons while strafing, a lot of them have negative attributes that really harm your accuracy at medium and long range. Now while I wouldn't recommend using a personal defense weapon while really strafing back and forth, it's definitely something that you can do if you get into an engagement that requires it and ultimately that allows you to survive. Now while strafing while in close confined areas can be very beneficial, this is definitely something that I would highly not recommend doing while at medium and long range when it comes down to engaging a target at those specified distances. This weapon, in comparison to an assault rifle, definitely has some negative glaring attributes that are not very good at medium and long range. As you guys might have noticed, the aiming down sight accuracy is 0.45. That is definitely not very good by any stretch of the imagination. In comparison to an assault rifle, this is a number that is definitely not going to be very beneficial at those ranges. If you were to try to acquire a target at those distances, you would quickly notice that your bullets are just missing the target, even though your crosshair might be exactly on their face. So of course, as I'm sure many of you guys are well aware, personal defense weapons are really made for running and gunning, getting right in front of the opposition and spraying them down with as many bullets as humanly possible. Having the opportunity to engage targets in close confinements are definitely going to be this weapon's strong suit. It's kind of what it was designed for ultimately, as well as being very compact inside of vehicles, but that again, that is not something that is really present in Battlefield 4. Now, since we've quickly talked a little bit about the personal defense weapon, let's quickly talk a little bit about everything else that this loadout is offering. In terms of the attachments, I really didn't have a problem with anything that was listed on the weapon. Sometimes I'm definitely not a fan when it comes down to suppressors and not really having a sight on weapons. However, I really decided to opt for more of a run in front of the opposition and spray them down like I've been talking about. So of course I didn't have a problem with no iron sights, considering that the iron sights are actually pretty decent on this particular weapon. There was never any time where I was trying to use the iron sights where I quickly found that I was unable to use them by any stretch, so of course I was actually very surprised by how clean they are when it comes down to acquiring targets at close and medium range. Now, considering that I decided to opt for more of a run and gun style when it comes down to getting in front of the opposition very aggressively, the tri-beam laser as well as the laser sight was very beneficial at allowing me to do this and be successful at the same expense. The suppressor was surprisingly very effective. Now, of course, suppressors do drop down the velocity of weapons significantly, so of course I did feel that when it came down to engaging targets at medium range, but I really tried to mentally put myself in a position where I was not trying to engage targets at medium range. So of course, if you're definitely going to be engaging targets at close range, this is definitely not an attachment that is going to hinder your ability very much. Now, the secondary weapon on this particular loadout is the M1911. Now, of course, I don't personally have a problem with the M1911. Now, of course, I would have much rather preferred the Desert Eagle, considering that it would have allowed me to shoot players at medium and long range, considering that the Desert Eagle is definitely a hand cannon when it comes down to it. However, having a very reliable secondary weapon is definitely not a bad thing, so if you're definitely very accustomed to the M1911, then I highly recommend it. However, there are also alternatives out there like the Desert Eagle and the Magnum that might be a little bit better at medium and long range combat, so of course that might be something to consider for future loadouts. Now, this particular loadout didn't really focus me in any specific path, so for the gadgets I decided to go with the RPG, considering that I can direct impact infantry players with it, so of course that's always a lot of fun to get multi-kills while using the RPG. And for Gadget 2, I decided to personally opt for the DS3 Decoy, considering that I found it to be very effective. It still allowed me to consistently be inside of the game when it came down to navigating around the map, and ultimately a couple of players were kind of tricked by it, but I feel like those were newer players to the Battlefield franchise. And of course, you definitely can't go wrong with using the mini grenades. While they might not be the most damaging grenades when it comes down to it, I feel like they're definitely a really good way at kind of tricking players to get back inside, or at least scaring some players for not coming outside, especially if you're playing on Operation Locker. As I'm sure many of you guys are well aware, on Operation Locker, the C flag, a lot of times players will kind of jump onto the staircase and just kind of stare outside of that 5-foot door. So of course, if you do have some grenades that are hailing down on the door, a lot of players really won't try their luck when it comes down to trying to run through it, so this is ultimately a good way at kind of tricking players to stay where they are. Now, when it comes down to my general consensus about this loadout, I was actually very surprised by the effectiveness of the PDW-R. This is a engineer-specific weapon that I don't really have a ton of experience with, considering that I've never really decided to jump onto the bandwagon of using the engineer-specific weapons, because a lot of the time you can use carbines in correlation with the engineer class. However, I was very surprised by the performance of this weapon. I know a lot of players over the last couple of months have been giving it a lot of praise when it comes down to having the ability to run and gun and be very effective at doing those specific tasks. So this is definitely something that I can recommend. I feel like if you're really wanting to go down with a hip-fire weapon, this is definitely one of the better ones, considering that it does have the magazine capacity to facilitate mowing down multiple players. As well as statistically, this weapon still allows you to be very aggressive while still having the ability to realize that you're not really going to be engaging targets at medium and long range. So of course, that's maybe something where I would recommend using a secondary weapon like the Desert Eagle. However, if you're just going to be playing Team Deathmatch as well as Operation Locker and or Operation Metro, then of course you could probably easily get away with using a pistol with a higher rate of fire. But anyway guys, that's really all the information I have for you. Of course, if you guys would like to recommend a loadout for the next episode, feel free to let me know in the comments below using a similar format as this gentleman. But until the next episode guys, this has been NMO, and I'm going to be signing out guys. Peace.